The wind tore through the peaks of the Redhorn Mountains like a living beast, snow slashing sideways against jagged ridges. Cade Mercer urged his horse up the steep trail, eyes narrowing against the white storm. A faint sound reached him over the howl of winter, a high, fragile wail, almost drowned in the gusts. He froze, listening. Not a wolf, not a fox, but the unmistakable cry of a newborn. Then, a second, and a third. The path before him was barely more than a scar in the snow, untrodden for weeks. Cade dismounted, boots sinking into the icy drifts, and crept forward. Each step crunched sharply, echoing across the forest like a warning. In a clearing, half buried beneath snow, Cade found her. A young woman, no more than 19, tied cruelly to a splintered fence post with barbed wire. Her wrists were raw and bleeding, bruises spreading across her pale skin like dark ink. Snow clung to her hair and lashes. At her feet, 3 tiny bundles shivered in the frozen remnants of a nightgown. One whimpered, the others lay still, their fragile chests rising slowly. The woman's lips moved, barely audible over the wind. "Don't let them take my daughters." Cade's jaw tightened. Without a word, he removed his gloves and knelt beside her, checking the infants first. Their breathing was shallow, their bodies cold. One small hand twitched in the snow. The mother, fragile as a bird, tried to straighten, but her legs gave way. "You're coming with me," he said, low and firm. She blinked, stunned, as if the words took effort to process. Cade drew a knife from his boot, slicing through the barbed wire. Rusted steel tore free from her wrists, blood welling, but her face remained stoic. He wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her with a careful strength born of necessity, and gathered the children one by one. The wind screamed across the clearing, but Cade's back shielded them. He tucked the infants into a thick wool blanket, securing them as best he could. Then he mounted his horse, holding the woman against him. The babies nestled safely. The cabin half a mile uphill would be their sanctuary. The climb was treacherous. Snow drifted over their tracks within moments, erasing evidence of their passage. Cade moved steadily, keeping them alive. The storm was merciless, but he did not falter. When they reached the cabin, the fire had long since died. Cade carried the woman inside, laying her gently on quilts near the hearth, then placed the infants in a basket lined with furs. He stoked the fire until it crackled, warmth creeping into the corners. The woman, barely conscious, murmured, "My name is Leora Hayes." Cade nodded, acknowledging her, but didn't speak. There was no time for questions, not yet. He cleaned her frozen, bruised ankles and calves, using warm cloths to coax circulation back into her battered limbs. The bruises were deep, the cuts raw, but she remained quiet, fragile but unbroken. He warmed goat's milk in a tin pot, spooning it gently to the smallest infant. Leora stirred, eyelids fluttering like leaves in the wind. She watched as he fed the babies, unable to speak but moved to tears. Cade's silence was a kind of protection, allowing the room to hold only life and survival. Hours passed quietly. Outside, the snow fell heavier, but inside, warmth slowly reclaimed the cabin. Leora's breathing steadied, her skin warmed, and the infant slept, swaddled in furs. Cade finally allowed himself a moment to breathe, hands resting on his knees as he studied the firelight dancing across the rough walls. When Leora opened her eyes fully, she whispered, "Thank you for not leaving us." Cade crouched beside her, meeting her gaze. His voice was soft, but steady. "No one dies here, not on my land." The story of her life spilled slowly, haltingly. She was 17 when she married Joseph Hayes, a wealthy rancher much older than her. At first, she had believed she was lucky. Silk sheets, feather pillows, a grand home. But the reality was cruel. Joseph wanted a son. When their first 2 daughters were born, he beat her. And the third, Joseph claimed, had cursed the womb. She had survived, barely, until left tied to the snow by her own in-laws, forgotten and abandoned. Cade did not ask questions. He only listened, letting her voice, fragile but firm, fill the cabin. He held her hand when it trembled, and in that simple contact, he offered reassurance without words. Through the night, the fire held against the wind. Cade fed the children, warmed Leora, and fortified the cabin. Outside, the mountains howled. Inside, life clung fiercely, and hope, like sparks from the hearth, began to glow. By dawn, a distant sound reached them, hoofbeats over the snow. Leora clutched her daughters instinctively. Cade's eyes narrowed. Joseph Hayes had sent men to retrieve her. "Go," Cade said urgently. "Follow the creek, stay low, don't come back unless it's safe." Before she could argue, he wrapped a spare elk fur cloak around her shoulders, pressed a bundle of provisions into her satchel, and handed her a small blade. "I'll lead them away," he said, and kissed the sleeping infant on the head once, quickly, then stepped back. Leora vanished into the trees with her daughters. Cade prepared the cabin, setting fires and traps to confuse the pursuers. When Joseph's men arrived, snow-covered and grim, Cade met them unflinchingly, unarmed. "You come for her?" he asked calmly. "You'll have to shoot me." The men hesitated. Before violence could erupt, a lantern swung into view. Sheriff Mather rode in, deputies flanking, rifles raised. Leora emerged from the forest, cloak torn, face streaked with snow, but eyes resolute. "Tell them what you did," she said. Joseph froze, disbelief rendering him speechless. The sheriff stepped forward, and in moments, Joseph and his men were in irons, dragged back through the snow. Cade slumped against the door, blood from a minor wound mixing with snow. Leora knelt beside him. "You're not dying," she said firmly. He grunted, a faint smile brushing his lips. "You came back." The storm passed. Snow melted into spring along the ridge, buds curling from bare branches. Leora and Cade worked to rebuild the cabin together, fortifying it and preparing it as a refuge. The girls, Eloise, Ruth, and June, grew stronger each day, laughter echoing through the mountains, a sound long absent from the harsh wilderness. Even in the quiet, small comforts took root. Meals cooked over the fire, lessons taught to wandering children. Each day was survival, but now it was also life. Cade carved 3 small wooden plaques, one for each daughter, their names etched neatly. Leora pressed her fingers to the wood, tears spilling silently, gratitude unspoken but understood. And though the past still lingered in shadows, a new chapter had begun, one of trust, love, and a fragile, beautiful hope. If this tale of survival, love, and redemption moved you, hit subscribe button for more frontier stories of courage, romance, and hope. Tap the bell to never miss a story that lingers long after the snow has melted. Spring had begun to creep into the Red Horn Mountains. Snow still lingered in pockets, but sunlight stretched longer over the peaks. Cade had repaired the cabin, reinforcing the doors and windows, stacking firewood near the hearth. But safety was never complete. Word traveled fast, and enemies lingered in the valleys below. Leora had begun to recover. Her bruises faded into faint purples, her wrists strengthened under carefully wrapped linen. Each morning, she woke to the soft cries of Eloise, Ruth, and June, rising from their furs like tiny birds. Cade would already be gone, checking traps, hunting game, or patrolling the ridges. Silence was their companion, but it was no longer oppressive. It was protective. Despite the danger outside, the cabin began to feel like home. Leora moved with careful purpose, cooking simple meals over the hearth, root vegetable stews, baked cornmeal cakes, rabbit roasted over hot coals. The girls' laughter began to echo across the small clearing, and with it, hope. One morning, Cade returned from a long patrol with a rabbit slung over his shoulder. He found Leora kneeling beside the fire, stirring a thick broth while the girls peeked at him through strands of wild hair. He watched her quietly, taking in the way her shoulders had straightened, how her dark eyes now held a cautious light instead of fear. "Breakfast," she said softly, nodding toward the simmering pot. The girls squealed and ran to grab spoons. Cade smiled faintly, his stoic face softening in the firelight. After the meal, they went outside to check the traps. Cade showed Leora how to set snares, where to hide game for drying, how to read the snow for signs of visitors. She absorbed each lesson with quiet determination, and in those moments, Cade noticed something new. The spark of resilience he had always admired, now tempered with patience and care. The first real challenge came a week later. From the ridge, Cade spotted tracks, fresh, 4-legged, booted. Joseph Hayes's men had returned, moving slower, careful, but intent clear, in the prints they left in the thawing snow. "Stay inside," Cade said, voice calm but urgent. "Do not leave the cabin." Leora didn't protest. She wrapped a blanket around the girls, hiding their small forms in the corner near the fire. Cade mounted his horse and rode down the ridge, positioning himself along a hidden trail, waiting. The men came, scanning the landscape. Smoke from the cabin's chimney curled toward the sky, but Cade had learned long ago how to manipulate perception. He lit a secondary fire farther down the trail, leaving tracks that led the men away from the cabin. Hours passed. By sunset, the intruders had vanished, their mission unsuccessful. Cade returned, dusted with snow, and found Leora sitting with the girls, calm as if nothing had happened. "You handled yourself well," he said. She looked up, her face tired but resolute. "We survived worse," she replied, eyes following Eloise as she tugged at her sister's hair. A small smile lifted her lips. Cade nodded, understanding the unspoken acknowledgement of their shared struggle. Life at the cabin settled into a rhythm. Mornings were for work, afternoons for tending the girls and garden, evenings for the fire. They planted potatoes, beans, and squash in the small plot Cade had carved from the rocky earth. Leora taught the girls songs, soft lullabies she remembered from her mother. Cade sometimes whittled small toys for them, a wooden horse for Eloise, a doll for Ruth, a tiny cradle for June. Each act, simple and quiet, became a stitch in the fabric of their new life. Despite the routine, tension lingered. Leora often caught Cade staring at the ridge, muscles taut, jaw tight. She understood the vigilance, but sometimes she feared he bore too much alone. One evening, as the girls slept, she approached him by the fire. "You don't have to carry it all," she said softly. He didn't answer immediately, fingers busy sharpening a hunting knife. Finally, he looked up, eyes meeting hers. "Someone has to keep them safe. Someone has to make sure it's worth living for." She stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. For the first time, Cade allowed a small sigh to escape. He didn't speak, but he let her presence anchor him. The fire crackled, and in that warmth, a quiet understanding passed between them. They were no longer alone, and together they were stronger. Weeks passed. The girls grew bolder, exploring the small yard with laughter that seemed to thaw the mountains themselves. Leora's strength returned fully. She could walk without flinching, lift the children easily, and even hunt small game when Cade was away. Their partnership was seamless, born of necessity, but growing into something tender, something deeper. One late afternoon, as rain began to fall softly over the thawing earth, Cade returned with a deer slung across his shoulder. Leora had already prepared the hearth, and as he stepped inside, the scent of roasting meat and wet pine filled the cabin. She smiled, and he felt the tension in his shoulders ease. That night, while the girls slept, they sat by the fire, their hands brushing occasionally as they prepared furs and dried herbs. Cade's voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "You stayed. You stayed for them. For us." Leora met his gaze, eyes shining in the firelight. "I had to. You saved us. All of us." For a long while, they simply existed together in that space, warm, quiet, and safe. No words were needed to express what had been growing: trust, reliance, and the beginnings of love. But peace was never permanent in the mountains. Word traveled from the valleys below. Joseph Hayes had not given up. Rumors of bounty hunters moving through the region reached Cade's ears. They needed a plan. A refuge beyond the ridge, if the worst came. One morning, Cade and Leora worked together to clear a hidden path through the trees, a route known only to them, winding down to a concealed creek. They packed a small supply of food, blankets, and weapons. Leora's hands moved with confidence, her touch on the supplies steady. The girls played nearby, unaware of the danger, their laughter a fragile reminder of what was at stake. That evening, Cade carved 3 small wooden plaques, one for each daughter, the names etched neatly: Eloise, Ruth, June. He presented them to Leora, who pressed her fingers to the wood, tears spilling silently. For the first time, they allowed themselves to imagine a life beyond survival. The next week was tense. Cade and Leora took turns scouting, while the other remained with the girls. Tracks appeared at night, strangers moving through snow and mud, careful, methodical. But Cade was always one step ahead, using hidden trails, decoys, and fires to mislead them. Leora watched him, admiration and affection growing quietly in her chest. He was relentless, yet cautious, patient, and always protective. One morning, as the sun spilled gold across the ridge, Leora found Cade whittling again, shaping a small set of beads for the girls. She approached silently, standing behind him. "They are happy," she said softly. He didn't look up immediately. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Because you stayed. Because we stayed." She leaned on his shoulder for a moment. No declarations, no grand gestures, just proximity, warmth, and trust. It was the quiet beginning of something neither had dared hope for, yet both felt in their bones. Days turned into weeks. Spring fully claimed the mountains. Wildflowers pushed through thawed earth. Birds sang from pine branches. Cade and Leora's lives settled into a rhythm of work, protection, and quiet love. The girls thrived, each finding a small personality. Eloise bold and daring, Ruth clever and curious, June soft-spoken but sharp-eyed. The cabin, once a refuge against death, had become a home. Word spread among travelers and traders that the hearth at Redhorn Ridge offered food, warmth, and safety. Leora's cooking brought comfort. Cade's vigilance brought peace. They welcomed those who needed it, teaching lessons, sharing stories, giving a brief reprieve from the harsh world below. Yet, even as life flourished, both knew danger could return, and while they never spoke of it openly, there was an unspoken agreement. Together, they would meet whatever came. One evening, as the sun set in violet and gold, Leora stood by the fire, holding June. Cade sat nearby, polishing a rifle. The girls' laughter echoed faintly outside. For the first time, they allowed themselves a moment of peace, of belonging. No one else was present, no threats loomed. "I never thought I'd have a life like this," Leora whispered. Cade's eyes met hers, quiet but certain. "Neither did I, but we earned it." They sat together in silence, letting the firelight warm them, letting the world outside exist without fear. And in that moment, the first seeds of love took root, strong and unspoken, quietly promising endurance. If you've been captivated by Cade and Leora's journey of survival, love, and hope, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you never miss a story where courage, trust, and a stubborn heart change lives on the frontier. Summer had fully claimed the Redhorn Mountains. The snow was gone, replaced by deep green pines and golden sunlight spilling over wildflower fields. The girls, Eloise, Ruth, and June, chased each other barefoot along the creek, their laughter carrying across the valley. The cabin, once a battered shelter, had become a home. Yet, tranquility is always temporary on the frontier. Word from the valleys below was grim. Joseph Hayes had not forgotten. Rumors spoke of mercenaries, bounty hunters, and men willing to cross mountains and rivers for coin or vengeance. Cade sensed it first. From the ridge, he watched the valley below, reading the wind, the movement of trees, and the faint stirrings of smoke. His jaw tightened. He didn't speak of it to Leora, not yet. Instead, he prepared. Hidden caches of food, water, and weapons were stocked along concealed paths. The girls learned to stay close, to hide when necessary. Their play mingled with practice. Leora noticed his tension. One evening, as they repaired a split rail fence, she brushed sawdust from his shoulders. "Cade, you carry it all," she said gently. He shook his head, a faint smirk breaking through. "I carry only what can't be left behind." His gaze softened as it met hers. "And now, you help me carry it too." Her heart stirred at the acknowledgement. They were partners, equals, bound not by fear, but by choice. The first confrontation came unexpectedly. A week later, 3 men emerged from the tree line, cloaks wet from the mountain rain. Their horses splashed in the creek, eyes wild with anticipation. Cade was ready, but his strategy was careful. "Inside," he said to Leora, voice low and firm. She scooped the girls into her arms, ducking into the cabin, while Cade positioned himself behind a hollowed rock near the ridge. The men approached the cabin slowly. Joseph Hayes was with them, tall and imposing, his hands gripping a revolver like a promise. He called out across the yard, voice sharp and commanding. "Cade Granger, step out! That woman is mine. Those girls are mine by law." Cade remained silent, crouched, eyes fixed, every muscle coiled like steel. The men's movements betrayed hesitation. Cade's reputation as a tracker and protector had spread. Then, as if from the earth itself, Leora appeared at the cabin's open door. The girls clung to her skirts, peeking around her. Her dark hair was streaked with rain and dirt, her eyes blazing with quiet defiance. "Do what you must," she said, voice steady. "But they are not yours. They are ours. And we fight for them." Joseph's jaw clenched. "You dare—" "Enough words," Cade said, stepping forward from the ridge. His figure, tall and broad, was framed by the dying light. "This ends now. You take another step, and it ends differently for you." Tension hung like storm clouds. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and pine. The girls watched from inside, silent, their small hands clutching each other. Joseph moved first, pistol raised. Cade reacted faster, grabbing a nearby tree branch, deflecting a swing from one of the men behind Hayes. A shot rang out, striking the ground near Cade's feet, sending gravel flying. He rolled behind cover, taking a deep breath before striking again. It was chaos in miniature, the clash of men, the screams of anger, the bark of commands. Cade moved with precision, disabling one man, using his surroundings to confuse the others. Leora, moving silently alongside, wielded a small blade Cade had taught her to handle, cutting at ropes and lances, distracting Hayes's men. The battle was brutal, but brief. One by one, the intruders faltered, outmatched not by brute force, but by cunning, terrain, and the determination of those defending the hearth. Hayes finally found himself alone, disarmed, facing Cade with nothing but raw fury. You can't keep them," Hayes spat. "They're already safe," Cade replied, voice calm, certain. "They belong to their mother, to life, to hope." For a moment, silence fell. Then Leora stepped beside Cade, her hand on his arm. "We choose them, and we choose each other. Leave, or be remembered only as men who tried and failed." Hayes hesitated, weighing pride against survival. Finally, he spat on the ground and signaled retreat. His men followed, defeated not just by skill, but by the unspoken bond between Cade, Leora, and the girls. The mountains claimed their footprints, erasing the path back to vengeance. When the dust settled, Cade and Leora emerged from the trees. The girls ran to them, arms outstretched. Eloise fell into Cade's lap. Ruth clung to Leora. June hugged both. Laughter broke the tension, filling the clearing with relief and life. Inside the cabin, they lit the hearth again. Cade tended the fire, while Leora cleaned the girls' faces, brushing soot from their hair. Each gesture was small, intimate, a reassurance that life continued, that love endured. As night fell, the wind softened. They sat together, the girls sleeping soundly in their makeshift nests. Cade's hand found Leora's, fingers intertwining. No words were needed. The quiet spoke volumes. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a sky dusted with stars and a sense of fragile, hard-won peace. The next morning, they set about rebuilding more than the cabin. Together, they planned the hearth's future: wider walls, a larger garden, a small stable for horses. Travelers came and went, seeking safety and warmth. Leora shared lessons with children who hiked miles to reach the ridge, teaching reading, singing, and stories of hope. Cade maintained order and protection, always watching, always ready. Time passed, and the mountains bore witness to the family's quiet triumph. Eloise learned to read beside the hearth, Ruth became clever at tracking small game, and June's voice rang like silver bells as she sang songs her mother hummed long ago. One afternoon, Leora found Cade outside, carving again. 3 small wooden beads rested in his palm. He handed them to her without a word, each bead polished smooth, each representing one of their daughters. She held them close to her heart, eyes filling with tears of gratitude. "You chose us," she whispered. "I always will," he replied, voice low, steady. The gesture, simple and unspoken, carried more weight than any words or vows could. It was a promise, not of wealth or grandeur, but of presence, protection, and love. As the summer deepened, the cabin became a sanctuary, a place where travelers sought comfort and safety. The hearth at Redhorn Ridge earned a quiet reputation, a place where survival met hope, where lives could begin anew. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Cade and Leora sat side by side on the porch. The girls chased each other across the yard, their laughter echoing against the trees. Cade's hand rested lightly over Leora's. She leaned against him, warmth spilling from their shared quiet. "This fire between us," Leora said softly, voice barely above a whisper, "it never went out." "It just needed a place to live," Cade replied, eyes on the horizon, the faintest curve of a smile lifting his lips. No grand declaration, no ceremony, only two people, a family, and a fire that would not be extinguished. They stayed like that until the stars blinked awake, the mountains silent, the world at peace for the first time in years. The girls slept beside the fire, safe and warm. Outside, the Redhorn Ridge stretched in golden shadows, wildflowers brushing the edge of the forest. Leora and Cade remained on the porch, hands entwined, hearts quiet but full. Life had been hard, cruel even, but they had survived. Together, they had built something enduring, a home, a family, and a love that refused to fade. And so, the hearth at Redhorn Ridge became more than a cabin. It became a promise that even in the harshest wilderness, trust, courage, and choice could create warmth, beauty, and redemption. If you've been moved by Cade and Leora's story of survival, love, and quiet redemption, subscribe, hit the bell to follow more frontier tales where courage and heart triumph, where storms pass, and the fire within never dies.